It was no surprise that when I spoke to Semaj Morgan on Saturday, he said something a little crazy, right? That's what Semaj does, but he's a truth teller. And we also can glean some things from what he had to say. Let's re-listen and react to what Semaj told us on Saturday on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. Thank you for making us your first listen, and thank you to all the everydayers out there who check us out every single day. I want to get into some of the things that we had exclusively as we were on the ground. Again, apologies for the audio. I know a lot of people complain, but it's a little different when we're in a studio setting compared to being out and in the elements, having to deal with music and crowds and such. And I'm not really an audio professional, but we are trying to give you something different. And we did with talking to Semaj and Brandyn Hillman. And those are the two players we're going to react to. We're going to re-listen to what Semaj said, the most salient point, I feel. And then we're going to also get into some of what Brandyn Hillman had to say and why I think that's very important to the mindset is, and at least the idea of what he had to say is important to what Michigan football is in 2025. And then finally, I wanted to discuss the idea that when we talked about the over-under last week, and a lot of people that I've talked to that aren't inside the Michigan ecosphere, and I mean that with fan base and all of that, they are really pessimistic on Michigan. Michigan is not allowed to get better. They're the only team that is only going to get worse. Well, every other team gets better, so we're going to talk about that in segment 3. Let's start off with Semaj, because Semaj Morgan, it's funny, my camera died, the main camera that I was using. So I had to pull out my phone and couldn't use the audio from the microphones. We had to go just straight with the phone. And Semaj, the things that he said, he had it pent up. He was ready to go. Kind of broke some of Michigan internet. So here we go, Semaj Morgan.
We're still here with Semaj. I got to ask, how much differently, if at all, is Chip Lindsey utilizing you and your skill set?
Well, I feel like when Coach Lindsey came in, he seen the type of player I was. Like, throughout the spring, it's like, it's already night and day because I'm running more routes. You know what I'm saying? And that's what I really do. I'm a technician when it comes to routes. So I don't want to be running bubbles all day and stuff like Coach Kirk Campbell had me doing. That's not me. That's not my game. Coach Lindsey really understands me. He has me running routes down the field, intermediate. I still run bubbles and stuff, but I'm a receiver. I'm a complete player, so I'm not just like a bubble guy or an end-around jet guy. So that's how I feel. I feel like Coach Lindsey knew what he was getting in me, and he can't wait till I use me. And I can't wait to play for him.
All right, so again, apologies for the audio. That's from my phone. That one is all from my phone in a noisy area. I'd like to thank some software for cleaning that up a little bit, but it's still a little hard to hear. I understand. But the gist of it, obviously, number one, he's throwing shade at Kirk Campbell. And I've seen some of you on the internet. You're saying he shouldn't be doing that. And listen, I love Coach Campbell, right? I've talked to him quite a bit, and I feel bad for him. But at the same time, I don't disagree with what Semaj said. Right? Like that, you can love somebody, you can like somebody, whatever, and not disagree with what he said. Now, part of it is on Semaj to being able to add that explosiveness. But I think the thing is, people look at his size and have been like, oh, that guy's fast. Not necessarily true. Now, he's worked to get faster. This isn't me throwing shade at Semaj. He's admitted that he could be faster. And so, therefore, he's doing all the work this offseason to work on his explosiveness, to work on his speed, so that he can match that. I remember when just for instance, back especially when I was a lot more slender, I was in a flag football league in Santa Monica, California. And I remember our quarterback, who used to be, he was a third stringer at SMU, at least so he said. I never checked the rosters to double check. He was like, you look like you got some wheels. Little does he know, I am slow. It runs in the genes. My dad, who once upon a time looked like a D1 athlete, also slow. So there you go. So it just looks can be deceiving. Okay. And so with that, I feel like Semaj, though, has put, because he knows that he isn't necessarily or hadn't been like this crazy Xavier-worthy style receiver that's just got all kinds of speed all over the place, has prided himself on being a route tactician, as he says. Now, on this show, we've said, like, yeah, we think that we should see more of Semaj in the short game. But if he is as good as he says he is at running routes, and Chip Lindsey's recognized that. Now, again, I don't want to see him getting fades. I don't want him seeing him being the main vertical option. Like, granted, the Michigan's longest passing touchdown of the year last year from a wide receiver was Semaj against Texas. I just generally don't really want to see him be the main option in that light. But he can be an option, and he can have a lot of different routes called for him. And I think it is interesting if you aren't just strictly using him in the jet sweeps, the bubble screens, just the quick game. Being able to use him more vertically, I think could be an interesting thing. And I think what's interesting about it here is really just the fact that Chip Lindsey is already here and he's like, okay, you can do more than what is the way you're being utilized, right? Like, I feel like Kirk Campbell fell in love with a lot of like kind of the AJ Henning stuff. Right? Like that was even, I think, before, well, like, no, he was there. 2021, like watching Michigan run the AJ Henning stuff somewhat predictably, and it's still having the amount of success that it ended up having, and said, okay, we're just going to keep doing that. But when you consider the fact that Michigan's sitting at, like, when it comes to yards per attempt last year, 5.4. 5.4, that's the least, that's the smallest number, that's dead last in all of college football last year. So, yeah, let's get the passing game away from the line of scrimmage. I mean, that was my big takeaway coming out of the Fresno State game is, like, I want to see, and again, we keep on going back to the Silicon Valley, Chris Diamantopoulos, and saying, like, well, I want to see the passing game go like this and not like this, right? He's referring to the doors. Now, if you're listening, you don't get the visual. But I think it's good that Chip Lindsey's come in and he says, like, we have more that we can do. And I'm excited to see what that looks like. And I understand we're not going to get a lot of people that are going to go on the record about scheme. You didn't necessarily see the scheme in the spring game, right? Because, you know, Chip Lindsey was a head coach of one of the two teams and had different people coordinating, calling the plays, you know, and all of that stuff. So it's going to be a different scenario once we actually get to the season. All right, I want to get to Brandyn Hillman because I think what he had to say is when you take in account the first part, and then you take into account what we're going to get to in segment 2, where he's talking about the defense, that's going to play a big role into why I think Michigan is being underrated, as well as my gripe, what grinds my gears of it all. We're going to get to that in segment 3. So we will get there here in just a moment. But before we do, ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it is super easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center, a financial Death Star. That's why I like to, I'm just all Star Wars here. I've got the Star Wars cup and everything. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place, so you just stop managing your money and you start building wealth. When I started, come on, are we really not moving? There we go. When I started using Monarch, I just realized how I was spending so much money on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and I save more. And instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check all of your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. All right, always trying to time these things. When we have other audio in the show, I have to just place it where I think it's going to be. Where you usually do a pretty good job, but sometimes it starts playing early. So with that in mind, I asked Brandyn Hillman exclusively about the defense and how good it could be. Here is what he had to say in a second, right now. the front seven and the safety room in particular. And I'm like, that is just, they're both so deep. How good can this defense be in your eyes?
In one of my other interviews, I kind of said, like, in my opinion, we're the best group in the country, up front and in the back end. The back end, we real young guys like me, Jair Hill, TJ Metcalf, Tevis Metcalf, Jacob Oden, like everybody young. We're all around the same age. And then the guys up front, you know, we known for that. And it's never a step off. It's never a step off. Y'all seen it from the Alabama game. You know, we didn't have Mason, KG, but it wasn't a step off. We were still out there getting to the quarterback. So I feel like it's a big year coming up. You know, my guys ready. I'm ready. Come out to show it.
Can confirm that is the feeling inside the building. Pretty much everything he said. So that was a little bit of a loaded question on my end. I'm not going to lie. It was. It wasn't like, tell me how was the defense going to be. It was me saying, how good can this defense be? That was on purpose based off of conversations I've had with people inside the building, names you all know. And because there is a prevailing thought that this could be the best, at least, and I know he's not front seven. I kind of include the safeties in there. I mean, not as the front seven, of course, but because to me, the only question is the outside defensive backs at this point. But I think that the front nine, essentially, if you want to call it that, I know no one's calling it that, and it's not a front, right? The front seven plus two in the back end, that could be the best in the country. And I know that is how they feel inside that building right now. Like, and that's what makes it kind of hilarious, which is kind of more what we're going to get to with segment 3, is that Michigan's never expected to either stay the same or get better. Because when I look at this defense, I look at it differently, and I know that you, if you're a Michigan fan, you're looking at it differently. If you watched that Alabama game, the ReliaQuest Bowl, and recognized that they were going up against the number 1 Alabama offense, which was not a slouch at all. They wanted to win that game. There's a reason people can sit there and say all day long, like, oh, they didn't really want to be there. Well, you know what? Jalen Milroe didn't have to be there. You know, a lot of those guys that were out there didn't have to be there. The guys that went in the NFL draft, guys that were, that did not need to play in that game, but they did. And that tells you that they wanted to win that game, right? It's kind of the inverse of Michigan in 2019 playing against Alabama. Still some guys that I don't believe were playing, maybe not, in 2019. And yet, Michigan had all of its starters and everything in there. I mean, Alabama did too. So, all right, why is this important? It kind of comes down to complementary football. And I wrote about this earlier today on Wolverines Wire. They absolutely need to get back to complementary football. ESPN put out a quarterback tiers thing today. They're talking about the guys that are established. Now, there's really no quarterback stars in college football right this second as far as established stars. Weirdly, this year, there's just no one that you can look at and say, like, that dude is number 1 overall for sure. Because, like, Arch Manning there is tier 2. I mean, he's not a full-time starter. Hasn't been yet. So it'll be interesting to see if he rises to that. But yeah, they had Bryce Underwood and Mikey Keene as far as a group in tier 4. And talked about how you look at the quarterback QBA and QBB, and QBA has this type of yards per attempt, 8.3, great quarterback, or I'm getting ahead of myself. Great interception to touchdown ratio and high QBR, and then QBB has much lower stats and all across the board, much lower touchdown interception ratio and all of that. And they're like, okay, well, Michigan's 3 years that they played really well is QBA, and the ones outside of that is QBB. So I already brought up the idea that Michigan only threw for 5.4 yards per attempt last year. That you're not going to be able to have complementary football that way. And that is how how did Michigan absolutely dominate? I mean, it starts in the trenches 100%. But it's stylistic. That's the method. And the idea of how Michigan has beaten teams has been, as Joel Klatt, and I think originally said by PJ Fleck, the boa constrictor. So basically, every time that the opponent gets the ball, you better be prepared, because Michigan's offense is good enough to at least take time off the clock and drive the field. You're not going to get many opportunities. So if Michigan's defense can be that good, and the offense is smart enough and doesn't flame out, doesn't go like quick tempo, still trying to take time off the clock, right? Like, I don't think that all of the talk about fast-paced offense, I don't think it meant like we're going Indiana 2015 chaos team. I don't think that that's what that meant when Semaj said that all the way back in April. I think that it's more of this is a team that can strike, that can throw downfield, that is going to be a lot more explosive. And that's fine because 2021, Michigan had literally the most explosive offense in terms of plays that were like 50 yards or more in college football. Now, was it consistently like 50-yard bombs? No, but they had the most long plays, explosive plays in the entire country. So that does aid that whole scenario because at that point, you're like, okay, I don't know if like I can stop this defensively. And defensively, I know that we're going to have to, going up against the Michigan defense, we're going to have to do everything that we can to beat it. And I think by virtue of Michigan playing the way that it did in the Alabama game, and the Ohio State game. I understand the Ohio State game, you had, 3 of those 4 draft picks that ended up going the first, obviously the 2 first rounders and Mason and KG, and then Josiah Stewart. They played in that Ohio State game, but they didn't play in the Alabama game. And I think that nationally people don't recognize that. And some of my compatriots around the network, I don't think they understand that either. And that kind of gets me into my last point. Michigan is the only team, we've talked about this a long time ago. It seems like the last couple of years we haven't had to, but we're kind of back there. And that's fun. Michigan is the only team not allowed to get better for whatever reason. They're the only team that just is going to get worse or stay the same. Why is that? Let's talk about it here in just a moment. All right, so when you look around college football, it's funny because usually when you look and you see like a team plays a certain way, there's always an expectation that they are going to improve upon whatever it was that they did the year before. Generally, unless they're just losing their entire team, which is not the case for Michigan, 29th in the country in returning production this year. That's 4th in the Big Ten behind Illinois, and a couple others. Wisconsin, I think one other. I think Michigan's 4th. Maybe 3rd, but they're 29th. I know that part. And you look at Ohio State, which is close to the back end, right? They're in the hundreds as far as nationally. We learned a lesson last year that you can't just always choose to say that this team's going to reload, right? Everyone always expects that of Ohio State, and that's generally been the case, but only in the last couple of years have they seen a quarterback come down to earth, right? The hatred that they seem to feel for Kyle McCord, who's statistically very similar and obviously led all of college football in passing this past year. But otherwise, like when his time at Ohio State was very similar to Will Howard's. Will Howard was maybe a little bit more of a gamer, made more big plays when it was absolutely necessary. Can't take that away from him. But Ohio State's quarterback situation finally kind of came down to earth, right? Like we talked about that for a long time about how they went from like every quarterback that they had was just better than the next one, from Todd Beckman, right? Afterwards, right? Went from Terrell Pryor to Braxton Miller to JT Barrett to Dwayne Haskins to Justin Fields to CJ Stroud. And then they finally came back to earth a little bit. And you saw, like, as far as the team went, I mean, they still did fine, but the quarterback play wasn't what it was. But they tend to be thought of as, that guy's gone. That's the reason I'm bringing this up. That guy's gone. Well, the next guy's going to be better. Michigan, for whatever reason, does not get that type of benefit of the doubt, ever. If they did a little bit last year coming off the national championship, fair, okay? That would be a fair assessment. But generally, if Michigan goes like they did last year, 8-5, no one's out there saying like, okay, they finished the season strong. Chances are they're going to be something to contend with this next year, especially now that they got Bryce Underwood and a new offensive coordinator, and they went out and got Donovan McCulley, and they got Justice Haynes, and the offensive line should be at least exactly what it was last year, if not better, right? Like, because you get better at football by playing football. No one ever thinks of it that way. They look at the last year, say, number one, they take away the Alabama game. They like to say 7-5 instead of 8-5, and say, all right, that's they're again going to be a 7-5 team, right? I'm seeing predictions all over the place about Michigan being a 7-5 team from a national perspective. And I look at that and it says that they're going to lose to every team that it would be essentially a contest against, right? Oklahoma, Nebraska, USC, Ohio State, and I guess pick 'em as far as that goes, Washington, right? Like, whereas last year, yeah, they lost to most of the teams with a pulse, Texas, Washington, Illinois, and Oregon. Am I missing one in there? I feel like and Indiana. Okay, so they lost those five games, but then they still had 2 really tough games after that in Ohio State and Alabama and won those and looked better. And defensively, they had figured things out to be consistent. Offensively, they did just enough. Now you sit there and say, I understand freshman quarterback. And for some reason, people say, oh, freshman jitters. Like, listen, freshman jitters will be better than what we saw last year. Okay, the freshman jitters will be better than what we saw last year. There's no way around that at this point. Bryce is significantly, no offense to Davis Warren and Alex Orji. I love them as guys. I thought that if they were smarter about it, they could have used Alex Orji in a smarter fashion. I think that they could have run things a lot differently. But at the same time, you look at that and say, okay, Bryce Underwood is definitely, as a true freshman, an improvement upon what they had. You've got the same receivers coming back. So at worst, they're the same. Chances are they're going to be better. They brought in Donovan McCulley. They've got a couple freshmen that can certainly help matters out a lot. Running game looks at least a push, if not better. Offensive line's the same. So, and then defensively, you can sit there and say, well, they lost that guy and they lost that guy and they lost that guy. Well, how did the guys that they do have perform against a top tier team? Alabama, a team that a lot of people think is going to make the college football playoff this year. Against some of those same players. Defense looked lights out. We saw those players go out there and dominate. We saw those players go out there and just absolutely run game. And the ones that didn't play and aren't playing again, the ones that were in the bowl game, Amir Hall and Quentin Johnson, I mean, those are big losses in some ways, but you like what Michigan has behind them and say that guy could be a step up. I don't understand, because when you look at other teams, like we talked about Ohio State, but like Penn State is still riding off of the 2016 wave in some ways. Now a little bit less so, because eventually it finally caught up to them. It took almost a full decade, almost. It took until last year when it was like, oh, Penn State, they just can't ever make this playoff, right? Like, but they expanded the playoff, and then it was started to kind of become like, yeah, they just couldn't do it. But otherwise, it was always like Penn State would lose a bowl game against USC 2016 and 17, and it's like, oh, but they just lost it so good. Lost it so good. You guys, don't you understand that we are looking at greatness? Meanwhile, that's the team that does tend to lose to the team with a pulse that it plays. Almost every time, every year. Michigan used to be that, right? Like, Michigan and Penn State would be a mid-off at certain points in times in the mid-2010s, right? Like, you didn't know which team was going to win, and that didn't necessarily say anything about either one. And then the team that lost, you're like, okay, they don't have a good team at all. And now it turns out that the team that won was a much better team. Generally. But you look around college football, usually teams that finish strong the way Michigan did, they sit there and say like, okay, yeah, they lost some, but look at who they got coming back. But no one else is really even looking at the schedule either. And the people that are looking at the schedule, I don't understand when I'm on the Big Ten squad and they're sitting there being like, brutal schedule. Are you kidding me? Look at the schedule. Like, are we really talking about like a Nebraska team that hasn't really truly been relevant, but might be very good? Might be very good, right? That's one of the games I have circled on the calendar, but has not been good yet, right? Like last year wasn't like they went to the Pinstripe Bowl. We're not sitting there talking about Nebraska, who narrowly lost in the national championship game. It is only 2 years removed from a championship, right? We're not talking Nebraska, like, let me just flip it around. We're not talking Nebraska, who beat Alabama and is a year removed away from the national championship game, okay? We're not talking about that. We're talking about a team that could not make a bowl game for a long time. And yet, you've got people who are looking at that game and saying, well, that's an automatic loss. Oklahoma, which I think is going to be very good this year with the defense they have and John Mateer and his offensive coordinator from Washington State. I think that they have a chance to be really good. But they, statistically, when you look at the record, the same as Michigan last year, and people look at that game and sit there and say that's an automatic loss for Michigan. Are you kidding me? Especially because Michigan's style of play, if it can get back to more, like, I'm not even saying 2023, if it can just get back to like 2021 Michigan, its style of play is obnoxious for any team to go up against, especially if the defense is going to be as good as it looks like it's going to be, right? Like, we've talked about playing against Iowa and how frustrating that is for teams. It's going to be relatively similar, even if as far as the defense is concerned, and it has been for several years. I would not be surprised if this Michigan defense is number one in the country. I probably won't be, because I think they face enough probably really good offenses that that they'll be able to break some plays. But man, I do not understand why Michigan does not get that type of benefit of the doubt that pretty much every other team has when it finishes a year strong and has as many good players coming back, right? LSU every year, right there in the conversation before they lose week 1, which they almost certainly will do again this year against Clemson. And yet everyone's going to be like, okay, well, that's just what they do. And now we'll see. Brian Kelly and LSU is going to do, well, wait, they went 8-4 again. Okay. Maybe they weren't the championship caliber team we thought. I'm not saying Michigan's going to win a championship. I'm just saying that people that are looking at it and saying that a 10-win Michigan season this year seems out of pocket, where it's like, okay, like, really? Oklahoma, Nebraska, USC, Washington, like, these are the teams that you're sitting there saying there's no way, when last year, when really there should have been no way Michigan beat Ohio State, they did, and beat Nebraska. It's not Nebraska, but Alabama. Come on. All right. That's going to do it for us today. We will be back on Tuesday, theoretically. It seems like we've been skipping Tuesdays and trying to do a show on Saturday, or at least we did one this week. So we'll be back, though. Trust me. That's it. All right, I'll talk to you later. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Peace.